Good afternoon and welcome to another Research in Action, brought to you by the Division of Research at Florida Atlantic University. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Darling, who is an Associate Professor of Early Childhood and Early Childhood Special Education at FAU in the College of Education. Her research interests include early childhood and special education educator preparation, inclusion of young children with disabilities, disability studies and curriculum, development for young children with and without disabilities. I hope you enjoyed today's talk, and here's Dr. Darling.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm delighted to be your presenter this afternoon, particularly because this subject matter is a subject matter for which I'm most passionate. The idea for this content came from conversations with family members with young children, as well as colleagues. The conversations were around the decimation of early care and education options and the potential long-term impacts of these young children not having access to school, potentially missing out during this time of COVID-19 and social distancing. So, as K-12 schools and universities quickly pivoted to remote or fully online delivery, early care and education programs struggled to adapt. For years, limiting screen time, promoting active engagement were the prevailing recommendations for this age group of children. But now, programs are being faced with everything being online or remote. So they were faced with the idea of making congruent these ideas that were potentially or previously incongruent. The idea of providing active experiences and limiting screen time with everything being provided through screens. Parents and caregivers immediately found themselves in the position of not only parenting while working, but having to explicitly think about how to teach their young children at home. It is my hope that through this presentation, I will provide not only information on how to do just that, but also to contextualize these ideas within prominent schools of thought and theoretical foundations that guide our thoughts about child development and growth. So today, I will discuss these theories. I will give you a framework for looking at child growth and development. And last, I will discuss some strategies for fostering early care, early childhood development outside of the classroom. So why preschoolers? Well, although the developmental period is the period of birth, age 8, I chose to focus on preschoolers because this is the age group that found themselves suddenly without options. Children who were younger than age 3 tended to be served in a variety of settings that included, but may not include, childcare centers. Children by age 3, in our society, the prevailing thought is that they had access or were accessing some sort of schooling. And to be clear, preschoolers are defined as children who are between 3 and 5 years old. So that includes 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 4-year-olds going into 5-year-olds. So in spite of being preoccupied with what we call things opening up, this group was still underserved as schools, K-12 schools, as universities opened up. These options were not opening up for children. And parents' concerns about school readiness, or would they be ready to transition to the 4-year-old class or kindergarten and so on and so forth, became quite a quandary for parents. So I will begin with theories of child development. As mentioned earlier, I will contextualize the activities or experiences that I'm suggesting within these widely or prominent schools of thought. There are varied explanations for how young children grow and develop. There are theories on how cognition, social emotional development, and other systems progress from infancy through adulthood. These theories provide explanation of what influences this growth and development and the major factors that can serve as prominent thoughts or limit the development, may or may not limit development, or can facilitate development. Although there are nuanced differences between schools of thought and theories, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably because I want to capture the idea that schools of thought encompass more than one theory or theorist work sometimes. Today, I will introduce you to the following theories or schools of thought: humanism, developmentalism, behaviorism, ecological systems, and constructivism. Again, I will introduce you to a couple of theorists within each of these schools of thought. The next few slides will follow similar structure in that I will provide the basic tenets or theory of the school of thought, and then I will introduce you to one or two theorists within that school of thought. Now, let's begin with humanism. Humanism emphasizes the value and agency of human beings, both individually and collectively. The basic tenets of humanism are that humans are actively striving to fulfill their potential. Learning is viewed as a personal act to fulfill one's potential, either through progressive levels, as you will see with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or through interconnected experiences, such as you will see with Carl Rogers. Theorists such as Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers talk to us about humanism. Maslow introduced us to the idea that humans experience a hierarchy of needs, ranging from physiological needs such as food, sleep, to safety, belonging, on up to self-actualization. The premise being that if basic needs are not met, individuals cannot become self-actualized. Note that there are no ages related to these stages, in that young children, even the youngest children, might seek to become self-actualized. Think about babies who can't sleep because they are wet or hungry, or preschoolers who are preoccupied with snack time or simply asking for a hug or taking one when they feel like they need it. Carl Rogers introduced us to the notion of the fully functioning self-actualized person. He noted that individuals need an environment that provides them with an openness and self-disclosure, that provides genuineness, such as being able to be seen with unconditional, positive environment that provides acceptance, empathy, and again, no age is related to each of these, but the individual, according to the humanist perspective, is continuously striving to fulfill these needs. Think about the stability of a child who is allowed to express his or her feelings, is listened to, versus one who is not. What does this do to his or her development? Next, we move on to developmentalism. First, let me note that this school of thought is dominated with an age progression over the lifespan. You will see specific ages associated with each of the stages. Developmentalism seeks to explain the biological, psychological, social, and emotional development of humans within stages over a portion of childhood, adolescence, adulthood, on into old age, or the whole lifespan. Theorists such as Lawrence Kohlberg and Jerome Bruner are within this school of thought. Kohlberg introduces us to the development of moral reasoning and how it changes as people grow older. He posits that we progress through three distinct levels of reasoning, moral reasoning. That is pre-conventional, ages younger than age 6, conventional, ages 7 to 11 years, and post-conventional, ages 11 and beyond. Think about preschoolers who were squarely within level 1, pre-conventional or punishment/obedience, the orientation of conforming to get rewards or favors. Who here has not had preschoolers come up to you, give you a big hug and a kiss, a little caressing, and then immediately ask for a treat, potentially of the chocolate variety, correct? Jerome Bruner introduces us to cognitive development of young children in that knowledge is represented and organized through different modes of thinking. He speaks to us about inactive, such as action-based, children responding to sensory stimuli, iconic, in that it's also image-based, where children view the world through concrete representations, and then last, symbolic, such as language-based and being able to handle abstract representations such as language. I want you to think about babies mouthing everything. They take in the world through their senses, they put everything in their mouths to try to experience that fully. We also want to think about a preschooler who is influenced by what they see, hear, touch, taste, really concrete notions, not necessarily abstract. As children get older, they become more able to clearly articulate and differentiate between abstract concepts such as yesterday, last week, and last year. That's Bruno's modes of representations. Next, we move on to behaviorism. Behaviorism is the principal notion within behaviorism is that there are human beings developed through a system of conditioning. The basic tenets are that behaviors are acquired through conditioning, such as reinforcement, punishing, and extinction. Of course, I could elaborate much more on each of these, but I won't take that time today. Theorists such as B.F. Skinner and Albert Bandura are in this school of thought. B.F. Skinner proposed operant conditioning, the idea that behavior is a function of its consequences. Simply put, behaviors are shaped. Albert Bandura builds upon the work of Skinner, introducing us to social learning theory, which emphasizes the importance of observing and modeling in this role of shaping behavior. In this case, Bandura posits that children observe the people around them, behaving in certain ways, and then they're influenced by this. If you have time, look up the Bobo doll experiment. In the case of that, where children were exposed to or witnessed aggressive behaviors displayed by an adult, and then this would influence them to imitate this aggressive behavior. So social learning theory builds upon behaviorism, Bandura builds upon the work of Skinner. The next school of thought is ecological systems theory. Here I will introduce you to one theorist, Yuri Bronfenbrenner. Bronfenbrenner focuses on the quality and context of children's environments and how this ultimately shapes development. He believes that a person's development is affected by everything in their surroundings, including immediate and distant surroundings. He proposed 5 concentric spheres of influence. These include the microsystem, which is the child's immediate family, for example. It includes the mesosystems, such as the neighborhood. It includes the exosystem, which includes friends and neighbors. And it includes the chronosystem, which is the depth of going across these environments over time of the lifespan. Bronfen's premise is that children are being heavily influenced by the most immediate family, the micro and mesosystems. As they grow, the influences of other systems become more prominent. Think about a young child who spends a lot of time with his or her own family and within his or her own home. And then as that child spends time in other environments, such as their neighborhood, their child care center, their schools, or even getting an understanding of their rules to our behaviors inside the home, outside of the home, and as much as they come into contact with these different systems or the different systems, they will be influenced by that. Now we move on to constructivism. Now's a good time as any for me to note that theorists may align with more than one school of thought. For instance, Piaget, who I'll introduce you to in a second, is considered both a constructivist and a developmentalist. For today's talk, I chose to put him here. Constructivism is a theory for teaching and learning. It is an amalgam of humanism, developmentalism, cognitive development theory, ecological systems. Sometimes you may even find a little bit of behaviorism sprinkled in there. Hopefully you'll get the point. There's a little bit of everything found here. First and foremost, constructivism is, it recognizes the learner's ability and understanding that knowledge is based on his or her own experiences. It's a construction of his or her own experiences. Knowledge is rather innate in that it is constructed actively rather than passively. Learning is an active process. All knowledge is socially constructed, and all knowledge is personal. Learning exists within the mind of the individual rather than outside. Our first theorist is John Piaget, and he introduces us to stages of cognitive development. You see explicit ages associated with cognitive development according to Piaget. He starts us with sensory motor, which covers the age of 0 to age 2. He covers pre-operational, which goes from 2 to age 6, and concrete operational. Concrete and formal operation. Concrete operation is ages 7 to 12, and formal operation is ages 12 and beyond. In the sensory motor stage, you see infants exploring the world through their senses. Again, you see babies mouthing things, not really being able to comprehend things that they are not directly experiencing with their senses. As children move into pre-operational thought, you see them being able to use symbols, including language, more and more language to attend to, adapt to, and to access their environment. As children move into concrete operational, this is where you see children being able to use more than one piece of information to make sense of their world at a time. And then last, formal operation is where you see more and more abstract thought. Beyond age 12, you just see a further refinement of this grasp on abstract thought. Piaget also introduced us to the notion of schemas, or the building blocks of knowledge, and these are changed through some sort of adaptation process, typically called either assimilation or accommodation. Children strive to achieve a stage called either homeostasis or equilibrium. So think about a young child who encounters new information. The adults in his or her environment can very often almost see that cognition taking place. What the child progressing from what they don't understand to what they understand. This is often facilitated by taking new information into the schema. Either it adapts to the existing schemas in the child's mind, which is assimilation, or it has to change in some way, or new schemas need to be developed, which is called accommodation. This has to take place in order for children to reach equilibrium or homeostasis. Be cautious here. Although a child reaches equilibrium or homeostasis, it doesn't necessarily match that of either their peers or the adults. If you think about a young child who actually believes that pigs fly, and that in fact those pigs are more like birds because birds too fly. So that child has gone through a system of making the information that they are encountering fit with what they already know. What they already know about birds and what they already know about flying. As children get older, this homeostasis and equilibrium will align more closely with adults and others. But initially, or when they're younger, you might not see this. Lev-Vygotsky builds upon the theory of Piaget, but he also stresses the fundamental role of social interaction in the cognition and the development of cognition. That is, he looks at interaction with both peers and adults. The hallmark of Vygotsky's theory is this ZPD, or zone of proximal development. He posits that there's stuff that children can do alone, clearly. There's also stuff that they can do with support, and that which they simply cannot do even with support. The sweet spot being fostering development in the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD, where children are pushed to build upon what they know, but also not pushed so far as that they become frustrated. So that's constructivism for you. This brings us to the end of our discussion on schools of thoughts and theories of child development. But you might ask, why did I spend so much time introducing you to the nuances between these theories and among? Well, and you might actually ask, when is she actually going to get to what we can do? I'm getting there. So it's simple. Theories allow us to predict, to identify, and to plan. They allow us to predict what to expect in terms of scope and sequence of development. With young children, we have lots of tables and charts and norms about by age this, they should be doing that. By age 7, they should be doing that. By age 3, they should be doing this. If they're not doing this, then you should be concerned. Many of us have encountered these in our pediatrician's offices, on the internet, and so on and so forth. So Most of these ideas are based on specific theories of development, whether it's physical, cognitive, social, emotional, etc. It also allows us to identify what is typical versus what might be atypical in terms of growth and development. As parents and caregivers, we're very often concerned with, is this typical? Is my child developing typically? Uh-oh, I think something is wrong. How do I know if something is wrong? The proverbial question, is this normal? Theories also allow us to plan, to identify and select meaningful, engaging, and appropriate experiences. Sometimes the extent of that is to select the right childcare center or school. Other times it is to select the right activities that we think might be beneficial to our children outside of school. But we know that while we're planning on identifying these experiences, we want to contextualize them within age, individual, interest and development, as well as culture. In the field of early childhood education, special education, we call this DAP, or developmentally appropriate practice. So I'm going to go into developmentally appropriate practice a bit. So developmentally appropriate practice is an idea that was born from our professional organization, which is called National Association for the Education of Young Children, or NAEYC.org. You can learn more there. We also have another professional organization called the Division for Early Childhood. The Division for Early Childhood concerns itself with the development of children, also births to age 8, both focusing primarily on those with disabilities or special needs and their families. Both of these professional organizations jointly promote the idea of developmentally appropriate practice for all young children. The core features of developmentally appropriate practice is that it allows us to incorporate child interest, adult role, as well as the types of interactions and materials that we provide. DAP means to allow the child interest to lead or direct activities. Understand that your role as the adult is that of a facilitator, whether you are a certified teacher, a parent, a nana, an OPAR, or wherever. You are there to facilitate the learning of children. And last, DAP means that you are selecting activities, materials, and interactions that are age appropriate, individually appropriate, and culturally appropriate. Quickly, the nuanced difference between age appropriate and individually appropriate. If a child is age 3, our norms, charts, and tables gives us an idea of what that child should be doing. By age 3, they should be walking independently, being able to move a certain way, speaking fluently in sentences, and so on and so forth. However, if that child has an individual difference, such as they were born premature, or they might have a special need, then those expectations change a bit, making it individually appropriate for the child, meeting his or her development where it actually is, as opposed to where it's expected to be. And then last, we look at culturally appropriate. Certainly you can see differences across cultures in how childhood is viewed, in how children are nurtured, in this idea of at what age should children be independent. So DAP, our professional organizations, NAEYC and DEC often urge us to look at cultural appropriateness to contextualize how we view or how we promote behavior. So before we go on to the next portion of the presentation, I want to discuss the framework of developmental domains. But first, I must caution you to think about these domains that I will go into next, not as independent or parallel silos, rather think of them as interdependent spheres coexisting within the child. In other words, I'm going to push you to think about the whole child. As parents and as teachers, as caregivers, we don't think about, well, for the next week or so, I'm only going to focus on this child's social and emotional development, and I'm only going to interact with that child to promote that level or that level of detail or that area of development. We don't do that. Everything that we do is interconnected. More than one outcome can come from interactions or experiences. So we don't want to think about these independent levels or sects of development. We want to think about contextualizing growth and development for the whole child. So here we have five developmental domains. We have cognitive, communication, motor, social emotional, and self-help adaptive. Cognitive development focuses on how a child thinks, explores, and problem solves. This domain also focuses on pre-academics, particularly when you get to the age of 3 to 5. Communication focuses on language development, both receptive, such as listening, and expressive, such as speaking. This includes pre-reading, writing, comprehension, basically understanding what is said to them and being able to make themselves understood. The next domain, motor, focuses on using both the large and small muscles of the body. When we're focusing on the large muscles, we're talking about gross motor development. When we're focusing on the small muscles, we're talking about fine motor development. Next, we have social emotional, which focuses on the child's ability to understand others, feelings, as well as to get along with others. And last, to be in control of his or her own feelings. We do know that one of the skill deficits that young children have often is managing their own emotions. They experience a full range of emotions that we as adults experience. However, sometimes they're not quite sure what to do with those emotions or how to express them. So we provide explicit and direct instruction in that as well. And then the last domain is self-help and adaptive, focusing on the skills a child needs to know how to start being more independent. Again, I want you to be cautious and think about DAP and developmentally appropriate, because this focus on independence varies widely across cultures. But in short, parents and caregivers want children to become more and more independent over time. So that's not really questionable. Sometimes it changes about how quickly that should happen, or the view on how quickly that should happen changes. The last thing I want to say about these domains is that they easily transition to academic domains as children can transition to school age. For example, the communication domain easily translates to language arts and literacy instruction in school age. The cognitive development area focusing on problem solving easily translates to mathematical or other problem solving and reasoning activities in school age. Social emotional, you will often discuss some of the disciplines within the social studies realm, talking about community, talking about relating to others, those kinds of things. So hopefully you can see the connection that is easily transitioned or made from looking at children holistically, incorporating all these domains, and then specifically looking at how and where children would be able to transition into academic domains as they go into school age. So I want you also to think about how the theories and the theorists that I introduced you to guide how we conceptualize and foster development within these domains. First, let's think about cognitive. Think about the way children's cognitive ability changes over time. First, progressing from necessarily being quite passive in terms of their cognitive engagement, and then progressing to being quite active. What theorists might influence how we view this cognition? Think about Piaget and Vygotsky's constructivism and the thoughts they propose on how. Next, communication. I want you to think about how language development might be shaped or through observation or modeling. Theories such as B.F. Skinner, as well as Bandura's social learning theory, might propose thoughts on that. For motor development, I want you to think about how motor ability quickly changes over time and what impacts these changes. Perhaps Kohlberg and Bruner's developmentalism proposes thoughts on how. Next, we have social emotional. Think about how children learn the social rules that moderate their own actions, as well as how they interact with others in their learning environment, whether that's their family, community, or school. Perhaps Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems or Maslow and Rogers' humanism propose thoughts on how. Last, I want you to think about self-help and adaptive. Think about how children become self-sufficient humans. Think about the rules that were provided by Bronfenbrenner and Maslow's humanism, how they provide rules, not rules necessarily, but how they describe the stages that children will go through to try to become self-actualized or fully realized adults. Of course, more than one school of thought or theorist might apply to each of these domains. I was just giving you examples of how they might readily apply. Next, I will go into practical strategies for how to foster early childhood development outside of the classroom. Now that you have been introduced to theories or schools of thought about child growth and development, the why, I wanted you to contextualize these within the 5 developmental domains and development to appropriate practice, the how. Let's move on to practical strategies for how to foster it realistically and practically outside of schools, within homes and communities. One last thought on the how though. In the typical preschool day, caregivers and teachers try to attend to the developmental needs of the whole child. Again, not as independent silos, rather as interdependent, interconnected spheres, the whole child. So in this same vein, in attending to the needs of the whole child, we must attend to their needs in the various areas of developmental domains by focusing on a combination of activities across domains. We also have to understand that one activity may serve more than one domain, or could be combined to serve more than one domain. So in the next few slides, there will be many activities listed. The more I have time to discuss, the more I will, but certainly I can make the slides or this information available to you after the session. At the end, you will see my email where you can request it. They will also put that email within the chat box where you can request this information. Let's begin with how to foster cognitive development. I'm categorizing these cognitive development activities within pre-literacy, pre-numeracy, and science activities. Most often because parents are often preoccupied or concerned with school readiness, which in their minds typically relates to reading, writing, and arithmetic. They're often concerned with how their child is going to be ready for kindergarten and beyond. And very often they focus on letter recognition, numbers, counting. Some go as far as sight word or reading instruction. So cognitive domain easily translates or transitions to this idea. Let me start with pre-literacy activities. Providing activities or interactions around reading and retelling. For instance, after reading a story with a child, you might ask them to retell the story, giving you the beginning, middle, or end. You might ask the child to predict, create alternate ending, or other extension activities. In the spirit of DAP, you can use a book that is on the topic of interest of the child. You can present it in an age or culturally appropriate way. It's particularly the dyad or the time of day when this might occur. Cognitive development in pre-literacy activity also includes labeling, color of places and objects at home or in the yard, taking time to periodically review this signage. If you're all at home, social distancing, this is a wonderful activity that you can do on an ongoing basis, because once you create the labels, you can go back and review those at least once a day or more, or less often if needed. This includes both the indoor and outdoor environment. If you think about, this will certainly provide practice with things like sight words, phonics, letter sound recognition, and all those other preschool type instruction that you would children would have had exposure to, whether in center or school settings. Think about how to infuse lessons of morality, meeting basic needs, and other humanistic goals in these interactions as you are providing experiences around literacy and pre-numeracy. Moving on to pre-numeracy activities, let's think about things like counting, naming, and writing numerals. Counting can be infused into routine activities such as how long does it take to wash our hands? How long does it take for us to go from here to the store? These kinds of things. You can talk about counting in terms of all the units of counting, seconds, minutes, days, etc., depending on the child's level of cognition. You can also infuse counting into games like Candyland, playing Candyland, where you have to count a number of steps and those kinds of things. And you may also introduce counting through number and flashcards. You also want to think about how you might infuse measurement and concepts of quantity into daily conversations. As an aside, it's been shown that children who use mathematical language early have greater success later in schools. So as much as you can, would you like 5 raisins? Would you like 10 blocks? Infusing those concepts, mathematical concepts, and urging your child to use those same mathematical concepts when they speak to you as well. These activities will set the stage for number literacy, mathematical vocabulary, counting, one-to-one correspondence, and other mathematical concepts to which they will be introduced later. You can keep it developmentally appropriate by limiting numbers to under 20 for preschoolers, or up to what you know your child's zone of proximal development allows. Certainly, children in the preschool age may be able to count higher than 20, but some may not. You will know your child and know what's appropriate at this time. Fostering cognitive development in the area of science. If you ask any preschooler what is the most exciting part of their day, they will readily recount the outdoor or hands-on activity from their day. Most reliably, this takes place within the context of science in the curriculum. An easy way to do science at home is to start with an easy growing project. For instance, you can grow bean plants and other things that grow rather quickly, so you can get that immediate results that children crave. Adults can facilitate the learning by talking about conditions that allow the plants to grow strong, such as light, water. You can even grow things that are unique to one's culture, such as a certain kind of bean that is often eaten at home. The children will see a direct connection, not only between science and the activity, but also how that leads or fulfills larger societal needs, such as feeding, housing, and so on and so forth. The growing project can easily be extended into a fully fledged experiment. What happens if we withhold water? What happens if we withhold light? For instance, you can guide them through a rudimentary notion of the scientific process by asking them to form a hypothesis, make a prediction, test that prediction, use the results to create a new hypothesis and what they might do differently next. This is certainly a skill using the scientific process that will serve them well, not only when they return to school, but throughout schooling. These activities should align with your child's level of cognition. A good rule of thumb is to keep it concrete and to keep it simple. Now we're going to move into communication development. Fostering communication includes the following. You want to think about opportunities to talk and listen to your child. The more words your child hears by age 3 and beyond, the better academic outcomes they experience. We know this. If you get a chance, you want to look up researchers Hart and Risley's 1992 study, a 30 million word gap, as well as the follow-up works by other researchers such as Aller, Hansen, and Paul in 1997. You can provide extensions for more appropriate models for sentences. If a child asks you something such as want wawa, you want to extend that language utterance by saying, would you like some water? Those kinds of things. So you want to make sure that you are replying to a child's 1 or 2 word expression by elaborating that into a full sentence. If a child says juice, please, rely with a full sentence such as, would you like me to get you some juice from the refrigerator? You can also promote children's language development by asking his or her opinion about events in a story or a TV show or anything really. Ask them to defend their position is also asking them to use their language expressively in addition to receptively. Even the youngest children can be prompted to journal. They can journal by drawing a picture, then talking about the picture with a sibling or adult. Siblings can add captions to the bottom or the back of that picture. if this is done in a notebook or other bound book, it would be fun to look back and look at the progression of the child, not only his or her ways to express him or herself, but also how their interests, thoughts, and feelings change over time. Next, we will go to gross motor development. And again, I'm not covering all of the activities in each of these slides. I will gladly provide you with the information at a later date. How fun would it be to create an obstacle course in either your backyard, the neighborhood park, or any safe open space, really? An obstacle course can be set up to provide activities around running, jumping, crawling, walking backwards, and other movements using the large muscles of the body as we're focusing on gross motor development. For those children who are not particularly active, they can help you to design an obstacle course that would be more relevant to their interests. And then that way, with that buy-in and ownership, they'll be more likely to engage. And then think about balloon play, bubble play, and how that can interplay with gross motor development. Who doesn't love balloon or bubbles, right? Young children particularly. Think about how you can incorporate that into the obstacle course. If you run here and throw this and jump and blow up this bubble, that kind of thing. Also, another crossover is you can think about making that bubble solution as the science experiment of the day. Think about Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems and how they can be tapped into to help foster motor development. If a neighborhood gets together and creates the obstacle course together, then that takes the child from one system to another. Fostering fine motor development can be around things like Play-Doh. Again, as a science experiment, you can make your own Play-Doh, and instructions for all of these things are widely available on the internet. So Play-Doh can, when playing with Play-Doh with children, you can incorporate cognitive development as well, such as following directions, like make what I make, or ask children open-ended questions about what it is that they're making, having them label their crafts and their activities. For children who are younger and or necessarily might be stuck on the idea of they don't like to create, you can use pre-made shapes as well. Think about Play-Doh shapes that are in the form of alphabet, and then you can extend that into letter sounds and so on and so forth. So again, these are not silos, these are interconnected. Another activity around fine motor development is making necklaces. So think about how happy you were when you would receive those macaroni necklaces coming home and so on and so forth. Well, I know you're missing that. So think about making pasta necklaces, using a variety of pasta shapes and sizes depending on the child's level of fine motor development currently. Certainly being asked to string macaroni versus, let's say penne, different size pastas, different size laces, threading, the skill development that it takes to get that string and grab it through that hole. Think about the creativity. You can also incorporate sequencing. Do we want to do a pattern of red, blue, yellow, blue, blue, red, blue, blue, white, those kinds of things. Again, the interconnected nature of they are working on fine motor development by stringing, but simultaneously they're also looking at problem solving, creating patterns, sequencing, predicting what comes next based on the pattern that's already been established, and so on and so forth. Children can also be pushed to write, draw, color, folding paper. Origami is a childhood favorite, and you know that can get quite complex or it can remain quite simple. These are all worthwhile fine motor activities for which you can incorporate other areas of development. If it's a writing task, you're focusing on how the child is holding the writing implement and orienting him or herself to the paper, but you're also focusing on what it is that they're writing, how they're expressing themselves, how they can use symbols through drawing to express their language, and so on and so forth. Again, I want you to focus on how these activities are interconnected across developmental domains. Now we turn to social emotional development. we're looking at fostering development in the area of social emotional development. We can take the time to debrief with children, prompting them to identify emotions that cause the outburst or tantrum. And I know that we might be experiencing tantrums because of the various forces that are in effect with the changes in our typical day, the idea that we can't go out how we please. Children might express or have meltdowns at home. So this is especially critical in teaching them how to manage those emotions when they're feeling either overwhelmed or feeling wronged by a sibling, etc. So taking the time to debrief about what it is they're feeling and providing suggestions for how they can express these feelings in a more appropriate way. Remember to use child-friendly language when you're providing these explanations and when you're teaching ways to manage emotions such as deep breathing, counting, using a stress ball, squish toy, taking self-initiated timeout, and so on and so forth. You may want to rely exclusively on concrete methods for young children. For the example, a stress ball is a concrete method rather than think positive thoughts if you're angry. The child might not have the cognitive capability to think positive thoughts at that time, but they certainly have the physical capability to squeeze a stress ball to take out that emotion that they're feeling on the stress ball rather than a sibling or equipment. The other thing about social emotional development is young children tend to be more adept at this than we are as adults. Children ask for hugs. They give hugs spontaneously. They might come to you and say, can I get a hug? And as adults, sometimes we're busy. Sometimes we're not necessarily in the mood to hug. But if they ask, please give it to them. If they ask for hugs, kisses, or other requests for physical attention, physical affection, they are experiencing a need that they have identified. And then the last domain is self-help adaptive, which can be fostered with the following activities. You might want to teach your child steps for hand washing, showering, bathing, brushing hair, other personal maintenance type systems. You might describe the necessary steps and create a checklist of steps in bathing or showering. In our field, we call that a task analysis. And if you're unsure about how to break that down, conducting a Google search for task analysis for, let's say, hand washing, you might find many versions that you can start with and adapt for your child or your specific environment. You also could encourage and provide guidance to allow children to choose clothing for dressing independently. I know nowadays we're pretty much relying upon leisure wear, but young children who typically wear a lot of leisure wear anyway can be encouraged or allowed to make these choices and to dress themselves. When we're caught up in the typical let's get ready for school and such, and we have to be in two different places at one time, we sometimes don't take the time to allow children to do that. So now one of the benefits of social distancing and not necessarily having to be someplace at a certain time, you can allow children to do this for themselves because it will take time. It will take a little bit longer, but think about the independence that it's fostering. Think about the social emotional, yeah, I did it. Think about the glow that children get when they get to pick these things for themselves. Next, you can encourage eating using utensils, invest in toddler-sized utensils for this time period, provide practice with opening containers, cutting, portioning food independently. Again, these are skills that will serve children well as they move on. I know that sometimes we tend to over-rely on finger foods, but incorporating direct and explicit instruction in using these tools that they will very often need to know later anyway. This might be a good time to do that. So this brings us to the end of the 5 domains and how specific activities might be used to foster development within the domain, but really in the whole child. The intent is not to pressure parents or caregivers to recreate the preschool or childcare experience. Rather, we want to focus on providing enriching, early learning, developmentally appropriate experiences for their children, not only during these trying times, but also as a supplement to when things return to normal, whatever that may be. These are activities that certainly can be incorporated even when children have returned to formal schooling or childcare school settings. Perhaps providing the following useful guidance might be useful. No need to try to recreate the structured day of the school day. Rather, thinking about what is feasible during the time period that you have, what your children are interested in doing, and what you have access to. Almost all of the activities that I talked about today can be facilitated with either accessing information on the internet, purchasing stuff from your big box stores or dollar stores, even better. So the idea is to use what you have available to you to provide an enriching experience. And then last, choosing a combination of activities, perhaps 1 or 2 activities per domain, but it can be more if the time or opportunity allows. So in closing, I will provide these final pieces of advice for fostering child development out of the classroom. So if there's no school, you should have no worries. So what you want to think about is using prominent theories of child development as your guide, thinking about what theorists might tell you in terms of being able to predict, organize, and select, using a specific framework for conceptualizing growth and development. I propose that you think about the 5 developmental domains as the framework, attending to the needs of the whole child, not just selecting silos, but interconnected domains, using developmentally appropriate practice, making it child-initiated, adult-facilitated, age, individual, and culturally appropriate. And then last, using domain-specific practical strategies for fostering development, even while social distancing. So at this point, we have a little bit less than 10 minutes left, and I am open to questions.
Just one question, Sharon. How did you get interested in your area of research?
Sure. I started my career as a teacher of intermediate grade children. So that would be 8, 9, 10, and 11-year-olds. And as I was experiencing difficulty with the skill deficits that children came to 3rd grade and beyond with, I started to think about, well, what if I had the opportunity to work with these children earlier? How might the early experiences change the trajectory of where these children came to? So that created my interest around early learning and early childhood.
Very interesting. As I said, we have a number of very interesting questions, but we'll refer to you in answering those offline, and then we'll post them on our website, so we are cognizant of the time. Thank you very much again, Sharon, and we'll be back next week. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.